what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it? I'm the Doctor. Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
Small off-duty Czechoslovakian traffic warden.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Alright dudes, it's time for another episode of It's Time to Rewind. I am known as Bubbawheat. Not the Bubbawheat, not first name Bubba, last name Wheat, just Bubbawheat. This season is Red Who, where I'm covering British sci-fi like Red Dwarf and Doctor Who, and joining me 3 million years in the future via the TARDIS is my guest, Dr. Stuart Knott. How are you doing today?
Hello, not too bad, not too bad. Bit cold, but doing well.
That's good to hear. It's pretty chilly here in my neck of the woods as well.
Yeah. Whereabouts are you?
The Georgia, the Atlanta area.
Okay, yeah.
So it's not nearly as cold as other parts of the country. I'm glad that I moved here, but yeah, it's pretty chilly here. Finally feeling like winter here.
Yeah.
It's early December as we're recording this. But we are going to be talking today about Doctor Who the movie, or the TV movie as it's often referred to as well, which was the first attempt at rebooting the series in 1996 with the Eighth Doctor Paul McGann in his one and only full-length appearance. It originally aired in Canada on May 12th, 1996, and 2 days later in the US on Fox, and about 2 weeks later in the UK. And it did not get picked up because it did not get very good ratings in the U.S., even though it got decent ratings in the U.K., from what I understand. But we will get into that a little bit more here in a moment. But before we jump into the movie, I would like to know how did you discover Doctor Who? What's your Doctor Who origin story?
Oh, that's great. So, my dad's a big fan of it. Basically, when I was a kid, Doctor Who was off the air because I was born in '85. It didn't really have conscious thought until the '90s. So Doctor Who was dead and gone by the time I was around. But my dad was a big fan, and he had all the Terrance Dicks books, all the novelizations, and we had a few of the comics as well, and a game on the Amiga that was pretty good. And there was it. Back then, like, it wasn't really on TV. They never really showed repeats on TV. And the best I had was the movies they did with Peter Cushing. So they did like remakes of the Daleks and Dalek Invasion Earth. So I was watching them and just sort of dreaming about what Doctor Who was really like. So it was really through my dad and through the books and whatever media you could get, because you couldn't really access it until 1996 when the movie came back.
Did you watch this? I think you watched it when it first aired.
Oh
then?
yeah, we watched it. It was a big deal. Everyone was like, I remember there being a lot of hype about Doctor Who coming back. I think people were really excited for it coming back, and I remember a lot of the fallout from it as well. And it really bugs me because I always quite liked it, and I was just so excited to finally watch like a Doctor Who. And I didn't have any real expectations of what it would be like. I understood the concept to a degree, and I don't remember if it was at the same time or around that time when they did start showing a few repeats. So whenever everyone asks me who's my favorite Doctor Who, I always have about 4 answers, because technically this was really my first. So I have a soft spot for the Eighth Doctor. But they started showing a few repeats, starting with the Third Doctor. So that was where I sort of really started watching. But I don't remember that lasting very long either. It was all very like in flux at the time. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we watched it, and I remember it being a big deal. And I'm pretty certain the first thing my mum said, turned to my dad and said, "It's very American." And I was like, what do you mean by that? I don't know what that means. I was watching it again last night for this, and I was like, they mean because it's set in America? Like, but there was so much, we'll probably get into it in a bit. looking at it now, I can kind of understand that to a degree. But there's so many things that people reacted negatively about this movie towards, yet they embraced in 2005 when it came back. It was really interesting to me, and it's always been a sour point for me. So,
Yeah, I think
what
it's
about
funny that you say that it looked very American, because that was, and really my thought watching this through the entirety was that it felt very American. And I watched it without really knowing. I didn't look up any background information. I knew that it was like an attempt at a reboot, and that this was kind of his Paul McGann's only real appearance as the Doctor. But I didn't know anything else about it before watching it. So, and that was my first thought, is like, this is very American.
I think, from what I know, from what I remember, when I did some research before I wrote a review of it a few years ago, I think originally it was going to be similar to other American reboots, where it literally would have nothing to do with the British show. Like they did that American pilot for Red Dwarf, where it wasn't really related. And
they tried that twice.
They
Although I haven't
desperately
watched either of those.
And I would say that's much more American than this was. And then I think they just, somewhere along the way, they decided that it would be an official continuation. And I think we were lucky to get that, because it very easily could have just been nothing at all, like the Peter Cushing movies. And maybe people would have preferred that and I think in retrospect, maybe that would have been better if it had just been, let's see what the Americans do with this concept and see if they kickstart their own series. And then maybe now we'd be talking about, like, a multiverse of Doctor Who, where the American Doctor meets the British Doctor and all this sort of thing. Because
I thought it was kind of like that middle ground, but I don't know if it would have worked if it would have gone fully American. But it's like, I do want to mention just kind of quickly that I was initially going to skip this one, because I was recommended that it wasn't.
I saw your thread asking about that. I was like, no, you can't skip it. You have to watch it, because otherwise it's not going to make any sense.
Yeah, and then I put it on Threads, and the response was overwhelmingly, like, I would say, I put a poll, and up until the very end, it was like 100% yes, watch and cover the movie. Then I think by the end it was like 96% yes and 4% no. So it's like, I guess I should watch it then.
You could skip. They tried to revive Doctor Who before Eccleston with an animated series. It was a web series, and they had I can't remember his name now. They had a different actor playing the Doctor. They regenerated him into an animated version that they ignored that in favor of the real Ninth Doctor. It's gone out my head now. It's Richard E. Grant. They had Richard E. Grant playing a Doctor in a couple of animated shorts. And that was the original revival before the live action came. You can skip that, but you can't skip the movie, because otherwise you're never going to know how the Seventh Doctor became the Ninth Doctor. And whenever you see like images of the Eighth Doctor later, you go like, "Who's that?" I don't.
Well, I mean, I've only I don't remember, like, because let's see, it's been two. Like my Doctor Who fandom really only spans 2 years, and
right.
I've kind of already forgotten a lot of the Ninth Doctor. Like I remember him as a whole, but I don't remember any specific elements. And I've only seen, this will be the third regeneration that I've seen, because I happened to catch the regeneration from Peter Davison into Colin Baker, because I covered that serial. And then first I saw Eccleston to Tennant, but I have no memory of that. And this is the third one that I've seen.
Not to get too much off on a tangent with it, but the Ninth Doctor, for me, I'm more disappointed by that, because of all the stuff that happened behind the scenes that meant he never came back. I always think, I just wish we'd had Tennant from the start. It's such a waste of a regeneration to get one series. And that's the thing with me of Doctor Who, is I'm looking for longevity. I don't care if they're good or bad, really. I don't want them to burn through the lives. Because as a kid, I always knew, oh, he's only got 13 lives. He can only regenerate 12 times. And in the modern series, it's like they bumped his numbers up by they did some stuff with Tennant where he didn't regenerate, but he did, so it cost him a life. And then they invent a new regeneration. They bumped him up to like his last life. And I'm like, you've just lost like a good 5 years of storytelling by jumping ahead for no real reason. And with 9, it's like, I just sit there and think, if that had been Tennant from the start, we would have had this really long run. Everyone would have loved it. I mean, they loved it anyway, but because he never came back and he did all the audiobooks and stuff, but it always sticks in my craw a bit because I'm on the fence because obviously the BBC, it seems like they didn't treat him very well and some bad stuff happened with him. And
I've heard, I think recently he said that he would be open to coming back, but he did not want to work with, I think it was Russell T Davies. Like
he had a list of people he wants gone if he's going to come back, and I was like, that's a shame because it just felt like you just get to, and that came up one of the reasons this movie didn't do very well. I'm not sure if it was in America, but with a lot of people was, like I say, there was by that point a generation of kids who were watching the show who don't really understand the concept of Doctor Who. And I think Sylvester McCoy did an interview once where he was talking about how much he liked Paul McGann and how Paul McGann got a bit screwed because this movie, there's a reason in the revival that they don't do the regeneration till the end and they build to it and they don't really dwell on it because audiences didn't really understand what was happening. And he was like, oh, he got a bit screwed because they're throwing regeneration at you, and I'm watching it again last night. The dialogue is like, let's explain what the TARDIS is and explaining concepts in 90 minutes and stuff, and it's a lot to kind of throw at people rather than
and a lot in the very beginning. They have like the voiceover.
Yeah, it's like what are the...
It explains the 13 regenerations, which that was, I know that they reference it, I guess, multiple times in Classic Who, but I didn't catch any of those episodes. So for me, this was the first time hearing about the fact that Time Lords only have 13 lives. Well, I mean, not exactly. Like, I do remember in the Classic Who episodes that I've watched, they do mention like just a limited number of regenerations, but I'm pretty sure this was the first time that I saw a hard number.
Yeah, I
13.
I can't say. It is difficult. I mean, I haven't watched every single one of the classics, but I do. It is very much. I think they were definitely making it up as they go along. But you can see it like when it's really weird because like when the first becomes the second, there's a line in there where it implies that the regeneration is tied to the TARDIS, and then the second Doctor, it's forced on him by the Time Lord, so it's kind of that's a bit different as well. And then when the fourth. Was it the fourth? Yeah, I think it was the fourth Doctor. He kind of merged with one of them merged with a future version. It was every time he'd regenerated up until maybe the 5th into the 6th or the 6th into the 7th. It was very different to now. Now it's very uniform. It's a big explosion of light. You can see the change happening. But back then, every time
the one that I saw, the 5th into the 6th into Colin Baker, I did, I talked about style. That one was again kind of a different because he had he thought that it felt, he had a line saying it felt different this time.
Yeah,
and then it had all the audio clips of like his companions and stuff like urging him to regenerate.
Yeah. This is it. Like every time it felt like it wouldn't happen. It was dangerous and all this sort of thing. But I don't remember if there was a hard number. And sometimes they skewed it. And even now, like they try to go back to that now with like, they've sort of inferred that actually he had lives before the first Doctor and all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'm like,
because I'm aware of the Fugitive Doctor and the War Doctor, which in the Classic Who, the ones that I've seen, again, like I mentioned, they do talk about the first Doctor being the first Doctor, the original.
I much prefer it when that is the case. I don't really like that they're sort of adding this unnecessary backstory to the Doctor. I think it's clouding it a bit, but I mean, it's always been skewed. Like the Master I was watching it in this, and I was sitting there thinking, because he's a snake at the start of it,
Yeah, I thought that was so bizarre.
and I sort of looked into it a bit on like the Doctor Who wiki, but I think it seems that from what I can tell, it sounds like they explained that later in like, because the Eighth Doctor is actually the longest running Doctor because he carried on in loads of books and audio stories, and I think they explained it in a book what's going on with the snake. I don't think it's anything that it was just like one of his ways of artificially extending his life. But yeah, I mean,
Kind of like Voldemort.
yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, and that opening narration, you're
And
right.
this-
It's 13 lives, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, what do you mean? What's a Time Lord? What are Daleks? What's the Master?
That is kind of funny.
And
It
all
does
this-
remand me so much of Harry Potter now that you kind of break it down. That's
Yeah.
it's almost like the he's got 13 Horcruxes.
Yeah. The Master, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't do that as a way to bring the Master back again. I'm so tired of bringing the Master back. Like he's always coming back, and there's so many other like bad Time Lords I'd love to see come back, but there's always some way, and it is. I mean, he gets sucked into the Eye of Harmony in this, and apparently there's some books about how his spirit gets drawn out of it. So you're not a million miles away, really, with that comparison. He's very Voldemort in a lot of ways. This is the Master.
Although whenever he first the ooze, I thought he was like, oh, so he's Venom now.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, that's not something he's ever done. But I think it's like I say, he used like genetic engineering and all these different tricks because when he first appeared in Terror of the Autons, he was basically on his last life for most of Classic Who. I think he was right near the end because there's one. I think the Fifth Doctor, when he meets the Master is like decayed and is rotting. He's like a zombie, and he's desperately trying to. His whole thing is, I need to steal the Doctor's lives. There's a very vague concept, stealing his lives, and what the hell are you talking about?
And they have that. It's so weird how in this movie they have that as kind of a basic concept, and he talks about his shell is dying, but they really only show that in one scene at the beginning where he like pulls off one of his nails and flicks it away.
Yeah.
And then throughout the rest of the movie, it's completely ignored. Yeah. But otherwise.
Like when he, I was sitting there thinking, wow, Eric Roberts is cut in this movie. He's really, that's like, he's looking good. He's doing well. But yeah, he does that, and then I think that he has a bit of a cough, but it feels like he was faking it in the context of that scene where he's with Lee and Lee's kind of the Doctor's pleading with him, and he's kind of like, oh no, I'm the good guy and I'm dying. Stay with me. But then he's just like throwing him around, and he's just being really flamboyant. He's doing whatever, and I'm like, are you? I mean, I've seen you. You seem pretty good, actually. You seem all right. You sure?
Yeah, I also think it was kind of funny. Like I said, I didn't do like any research. I didn't even like look out the the cover art, which has Eric Roberts prominently on there, and so I just started it, and then Eric Roberts shows up in the credits, and he shows up at the ambulance driver, and I'm like, oh, so the Master is going to be Eric Roberts.
It's gonna be him. Yeah, and he came back as well. He came back in some audiobooks too, apparently. I thought that was. I did like that. I think I don't know if Lee ever did, but McGann,
Lee and
Eric Roberts
Grace,
and Grace, they all came back.
The actors, they came back, but they didn't play either of the same. They played different characters, but they did record for Big Finish.
Yeah, I would say I should listen to some of them, but I've seen the run times of them, and I'm just like, I ain't got time for 6 hours of audio. Like I'd read the book, but I don't have time to read half the time anyway. So
I was curious to try some, because I have the time for it, because I listen to podcasts and music at work, but for me the off put is the cost.
Yeah. I would rather they did what they're doing now with some of the restoration, where if they did some basic animation and did like a little animated series. I was desperately hoping we'd see Paul McGann get a small side series when he did that webisode for Day of the Doctor. I was so happy when he had Night of the Doctor and he came back, and I was like, yes, my Doctor is back. Here he is. We're getting finally some vindication, and then he just regenerated, and I was like, oh, come on, man. Can't catch a break.
Yeah, one thing that I did want to jump back to, going back to the beginning of the movie, and how I thought that it looked very, it felt very American. And for me, that was like right at the beginning for the storytelling, because the TARDIS lands in, in America, which San Francisco. Yeah, because that, like, I didn't really clock what part of the U.S. it was. Like, I could tell that it was U.S., but
Oh, that's interesting, because I was going to say, I bet it was filmed in Vancouver.
Yeah,
Doubling
it
San
was.
Francisco.
It was filmed in
Always is.
British Columbia.
It
Like, it was
says
definitely
tax breaks,
filmed
man.
in Canada, and that was like another thing. It's like, it has a very American look to it, and the fact that all of the because even in the Who episodes that I've seen that took place in America, like the Empire State Building episode that has Andrew Garfield in it playing a New Yorker before he was Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Like, that is still using a lot of English actors playing Americans.
Yeah.
But this one, I could tell that was a North American cast.
I can get that. But I think from our perspective, I don't think most. I don't know. I can't speak for everybody, but I feel like anyone who's watched a lot of Doctor Who's probably okay with it, with the location. I would argue it's probably the TARDIS that threw them off, because suddenly it's this cathedral, this epic, and I loved that interior. I thought it was, because I was like, oh, now Doctor Who's always been low budget, but when you see that TARDIS interior, suddenly I'm thinking money. They've put money into this. They've put time into it, and I thought it looked great. It's like, that's my favorite.
Yeah,
because it
it's
actually
always
looks
like the
somewhere you
TARDIS
can
is
live.
always bigger on the inside, but it's like always just a little bit bigger. Like, it's you go from a tiny box to a big room, and I believe even in the classic. Yeah, I believe even in the classic one, that's referred to, there's more rooms, but we only really ever see the main chamber. And this one, it was nice that we actually saw like a little bit more of the TARDIS. It actually felt like a proper ship rather than just a big room.
It probably isn't, but I wouldn't be surprised if this was the first time they showed a completely different room in the TARDIS. I can't speak to that. I know that there was a Fourth Doctor one where he had a female Time Lord companion. I think it was Romana, and she was trying on regenerations as she kept coming and going from a room. But I don't think you saw that room. But again, I haven't seen every episode. But I loved the look of it and the scale of it, and and then, like I say, in the revival series, the TARDIS control room is gigantic. It's huge, and no one seems to have expressed an issue with that being too. It's like, is that too American? I guess not, because they film it in Wales. And I'm like, well, it's still not classic Doctor Who. And then we did kind of get back to that at some point. I think it was the 13th Doctor brought back the big circles and stuff, and it started to resemble a classic Who control room. But I always thought, well, if you've got the money to do it better, then do it better. Like, and I did like that about it. But you do see that, like, especially at the hospital, feels very ER. The ER was hot.
Yeah, and also the fact that as soon as he comes out of the TARDIS, he gets gunned down. It's
shot.
Like,
yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, we're definitely in America.
We're definitely in America. We're there. Yeah, I did like that, and they play that up later when his eccentricities are chalked up to him being British. They say, oh yeah, I guess so. I guess I'm British. I'm like, oh, he's British. That's okay.
He's from London.
Yeah, he's from London. And,
Grace constantly says, oh, he's from London.
He's from London. Don't listen. And he's handing out these jelly babies, and people are eating them. And I'm sitting there watching it now, like, oh, no one would ever take a sweet from the hand of a stranger now. Like,
especially like
especially a British person.
Feels like it's unwrapped and it just came from his pocket.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a little piece of lint with my jelly baby.
I think that's definitely for the old school. I guess for my dad, it would be a lot of the, oh, it's not this low budget affair sort of thing, which is really interesting. And
it's funny too that even though I'm not like super well versed in the history of Who, I did notice like the kind of too obvious references, because like whenever he's looking through the lockers, he pulls out the Tom Baker scarf.
And then,
the jelly babies. I know that's also something one of the previous doctors did.
Yeah, I think it was possibly Tom Baker as well. Yeah, he had the scarf. I think he had the hat at one point, and then there's a few. I always love seeing those little references like that when they crop up, and he sort of talks about the fact that it's supposed to be able to change into different forms, but it got stuck. And then a really interesting line where she asks him if he can turn into different species, and he says yes, but only when he dies.
I noticed that there was a reference that he was supposedly half human.
Yeah, I don't think that had ever come up before, and I don't think it's ever come up since. And I think I've read up on like the Doctor Who wiki about the Eighth Doctor, and it's been speculated since that that may have been a quirk of this regeneration, which I think is odd because I don't know, I've never heard that before. But I remember reading once that there was a book, because when this came out, and shortly after they did a Children in Need or a comic relief special where they had Rowan Atkinson play the Doctor, and he comically regenerated into Hugh Grant and a few other forms. And in this book, they talk about how it was a really turbulent time in the Doctor's life, and they kind of hand wash away this movie as though they're ashamed of it. And they sort of talk about how, he said he was half human, but he didn't know what he was talking about. He wasn't making sense. And let's just forget about it and move on. Let's get back to the canon and everything. And I'm like, as I was watching it today thinking, you're half human, and that's why you can't open the Eye of Harmony. But opening the Eye of Harmony will suck whatever planet the TARDIS is landed on into a black hole. So why would you want to open it? And if only a human can open it, why would the Time Lords create it so only a human can open it? That doesn't make much sense. And it's like, well, it's lucky the TARDIS likes Lee and it opens for him. But even if the TARDIS liked him, why would it do anything for him when the Master is in there? And surely it doesn't like I was like, yeah, I could see why we'd have to just kind of hand wave some. And I like this film, and I'm sitting there like, yeah, this is odd when you think about it. Like these are the things I'm thinking about watching it, not like, oh, it's too American. I'm like, what? This doesn't make sense. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I definitely thought a lot of that was weird, and I even, whenever he said that the Doctor was half human, I did think that was supposed to just be a quirk of this regeneration.
I think it's better to think that, because I don't think they've ever brought it up since.
Mm-hmm.
It does kind of explain like why he likes Earth and humans so much, I guess. But
and I also liked I did kind of like the fact that they have the whole the operations scene, and they keep saying that the X-ray is a double exposure.
Double exposed every time. Double exposure. Yeah.
And they have the the probe as they're going through the arteries, and Grace gets lost in there because of his arterial structure with the two hearts, and his death scene and his regeneration felt very horror movie vibe to me.
Yeah, I mean, they had that perfect parallel with Frankenstein for it, which was great, and it was.
And Will Sasso in here too, which I've kind of not. I won't go so far as to say I'm a fan of his, but I've seen him in a lot of things, and I always recognize him, and I always enjoy whenever I see him, because I watched Mad TV, whenever it started, and I guess I looked it up, and I know that Mad TV started in like around this time, and this was, I think, the year before Will Sasso went on to be on Mad TV, so that's like right around this time, and I thought that was interesting. Although I did think that it was weird that they gave him so much screen time for just this random character that doesn't really have any interaction with the Doctor, and also this connection with the Richard Nixon mask too, because that's another thing.
Yeah, there was quite.
Sasso was wearing it during the New Year's Eve party.
There was quite a bit of watching it back at the start of kind of, this is taking a while to kick in, and I'm like, obviously Grace wouldn't be in the morgue, but maybe it would have been better if somehow it had been her there instead, and because there's a bit later where he says to her, I came to life before your eyes, and I was like, no, you didn't. You came back to life in a morgue in the freezer and bumped into her the next day and kidnapped her, sort of thing. So I was like, if she'd been there going over the record, and then he'd come out, she'd passed out, and then he just kind of wandered off. That would have made a bit more sense, because then she'd have been linked to him. And
But they
we've had
did
to
at least
rewrite
have
some
the
scenes and stuff.
probe coming out of his
Yeah,
body
that was
to
great.
prove that he was the same.
But
Although it also didn't make any sense why that would have happened.
that regeneration, I always liked that regeneration, because it's very like it is quite horrific, and you see all this bone structure changing, and because now you don't really see anything. I can't say I'm a massive fan of the big orange light we get now. It's very dramatic, but it's odd. It's very magical, and this felt more physical, and it was really raw the way it was kind of changing. It was a bit almost like a very tame American Werewolf in London in it to a degree. And
the other thing that I did like about that whole his method of regeneration is that he has he explains it because he was under anesthesia.
yeah,
That his
nearly stopped it.
memory loss, and which I thought that was an interesting little narrative device, which kind of makes the Doctor himself be the audience surrogate, because he's explaining it. He's explaining the the elements of his regeneration, and like the aspects of the series itself as he's gaining his memory, but also to the audience.
Yeah, and he's often, I think the fourth Doctor was all over the place when he regenerated as well. And there's usually a period of, that's usually what will happen in a first Doctor episode, will be the Doctor's frazzled, and who is this person, working out their personality. But here it was much more intense, because when he said the anesthesia nearly stopped it from even happening, and nearly caused him to properly die. And I thought that added an element of danger to it, and especially to him. And then he did kind of go off the rails a bit as soon as he remembered. He was all of a sudden he's just like, the Master's Arrival Time Lord, and he's told my TARDIS that it stands for this, and the Eye of Harmony is open, and this is all going to happen. I'm like, dude.
Yeah, like so much so that he scared off Grace at that point.
It made sense in that scene, because it's all rushing back to him. But then that's when I noticed the movie suddenly really starts to speed up. Like he, as soon as he gets his memory back, it's the eyes open. We've only got till midnight. It's 9 now. We need to find the clock. Let's get moving. And I'm like, I mean, you could have done this a bit faster if you just.
that was one other element of this movie that I didn't really like as much. Like I could see where they were going, but I thought that they made the Doctor a little bit too omniscient. He seems to know everything, but he also knew so much about the people around him. Like he knew random people's futures.
I've never seen that part before. I think some of it I assume from context from watching it, that the fact that the eye was open, that's what was giving him the connection to the Master and stuff. I got that. I could kind of explain that. But yeah, him going around and telling people their futures, I've never noticed him ever doing that before, but he may have done. But it's really weird as well, because he tells Gareth about his test or whatever. He's like, the second question, don't forget. Tells him his future. He tells there was someone else he told some stuff to, I think. And then when Grace is like, what about me? Grace is like, what about me? And he's like, oh no, I can't tell you anything, because it could unravel the timeline. And I'm like, but you've just told two people stuff. What do you mean you can't tell her anything? And you tell Lee at the end, don't be here next year. And I've always wanted to see an episode of the new show that shows him going to New Year's 1997 to see what happens in San Francisco 97. That means Lee shouldn't come back.
It would be I want to know what it was, because this takes place on Y2K. this is New Year's Eve 1999, which it's so funny, and I could tell that it was shot and filmed years before which it's such a weird choice to take place like 3 years in the future.
It was all Y2K fever back then. Everything was Y2K back then. So.
Which is why I could tell that this was not filmed in '99, that it was filmed before, because there was no references to Y2K whatsoever. It was just...
I did like that he was doing that. I thought that was interesting, because I don't think I've ever seen a timeline. Usually he can intuit stuff about the time and the place he's in, but not normally the people. Like we've seen new episodes of Who where he can like eat grass, and he's like, "Oh, we're in 19 whatever," and I think that sometimes it's like, "Oh, the air smells like this," and I've always liked that. I think that's kind of quirky. But I don't.
I just caught that.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that in a recent in the Unicorn and the Wasp. I just recently watched that, and as I'm going through, my in sequential all the new Who episodes, and he's like, yeah, I can tell based on the the smell of the air that it's in the 1920s, and then Donna says, or you just noticed that car over there.
Yeah. Yeah. That wouldn't do him much in this, because it's like, oh, it smells like New San Francisco. And if they said, what, that car over there, and it's like a British Columbia license plate or something, it's parked outside of some. Like, oh yeah, we're totally in San Francisco. It's like, yeah, of course you are. And I was going to mention that because usually the Time Lords, they can recognize each other despite regenerations, but that's very inconsistent as well. And I was like, oh, the Doctor doesn't recognize the Master, but I was like, I think I'm going to give that a pass because he's possessing a body, so he probably wouldn't know it was him. Even though when he opens the door, when the Master comes to Grace's, and there's a really dramatic moment, it's like, it feels like he's aware right then, this is the Master, and this is a problem. But he's like, no, we need to go straight to the Institute of wherever, which is a great moment where he's, of course I do. I did like that.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting too. I kind of liked the fact that in a way they gave the Master a companion with Lee.
Yeah. I did like that as well. I always found it funny though, because he's like, oh, gold dust is, oh yeah, and I'm like, I mean, maybe it's a British thing, but I'm not sure where in America you'd be able to spend or do anything with gold dust. Like, where would you even go? Where would you go with a bag of gold dust?
There's actually that's actually a big thing, at least nowadays. I'm not sure if it was so much in '96, but there's a ton of places. It's like, we'll take your gold jewelry and
but like a bag of
give you
dust.
cash for gold. Yeah, well, they would melt it down.
There you go. Yeah, this is it. Because I was like linking it to movies and stuff where you get like a bag of diamonds, and I was just like, I mean, surely you have to go to like a shady person to get rid of that bag of diamonds, and they're probably going to shoot you to get it. Like they're going to be.
I mean, you do have to go to kind of like the poor part of town. That's where you find all the cash for gold places. Yeah, cash for gold pawn shops.
But I did love that where he said to him, like, what do you want? And he was like, oh, $1 million. And he's like, $1 billion. He's like, what would that buy you? Like, power. Like, yeah, that was great. I thought that was a really good moment. And when he's driving the taxi, and Lee says, oh man, you killed me. And he's like, you want me to kill you? He's like, no, I just think you're a funny guy. I'm glad one of us is immune. I loved their Eric Roberts. He seemed like he was having a great time filming this. He was really into it, and in just the right level, just the right way. And same with Paul McGann as well. He's definitely very thrown himself into it. And I think that threw a lot of people off at the time as well, because I think he was probably the youngest Doctor. He's probably younger than Peter Davidson, and he was pretty young. But the Doctor had never been like this before. And I think I remember he was like described as like a romantic and as an adventurous.
Yeah, I thought his looked, and I know that, I was told that most of the classic Doctor's regenerations have kind of an element of like Victorian-esqueness to them. But I kind of felt like Paul McGann looked, I think especially with his hairstyle, he looked and kind of felt more Victorian era and kind of out of place. I almost feel like it would have worked a little bit better if they would have modernized him a bit more. And I think they did that a bit more with Eccleston. I thought that he felt more like a modern Doctor.
See, I think that's really interesting, because I've always found Eccleston's look to be really bland for the Doctor, which is ironic because he's the only one I can legitimately cosplay as, because without having to spend a load of money on different clothing. Because the Doctor's always a bit. So when we got Tennant and he was just wearing that overcoat, I was like, there we go. a pinstripe suit and an overcoat, just something that shows this guy doesn't quite belong. Whereas with Eccleston, he's like, he could be anybody. And I always felt that was a bit of a detriment to him because it didn't make him stand out against the other doctors as much. Whereas with Paul McGann, he was visually very similar to the third Doctor with his outfit, maybe with a little bit less fancy going on. But yeah, the hair word for me, I think that was a wig at the time. But I always I thought he was, he was much more impulsive, and he threatened that officer with a gun. But I think he was. I thought that
he threatened himself.
He was just like, stand back before I shoot myself. And I was like, that's so funny because it feels like he's still frazzled in the head and he's got it mixed up. But at the same time, it's like, well, no, he's not gonna threaten to kill the cop. So it makes perfect sense on all these different levels. And then he's riding along on a motorcycle and everything. And these are all things that the Doctor didn't really used to do. He was more of a thinking man. He very rarely was this kind of adventurous. And people,
the chase scene was another thing that that felt very American. Fox. that felt very primetime Fox that they were going for.
I think I remember people didn't really like that. They said this is too American. This isn't what the Doctor is like. And now the Doctor is massively action packed. He's always getting into scrapes.
And again, jumping back to where I am in my current watch, they have a scene with Tennant and Donna where they reference and there's a lot of running. Always running.
Yeah, always running. Yeah, lots of running. It's much faster paced, and nowadays the budget is way more than it ever used to be. And now people love it. But for me, the biggest one, I remember the thing that really upset everybody was that he kissed Grace. They were like, people were literally, it was in the sun and everything. They said the Doctor would never do that. He's never been compelled to kiss a companion before. People hated that he kissed Grace. And I was like, I loved it because she's really attractive for starters. They both got pretty good chemistry, and he was a different sort of Doctor and everything. And I thought it worked really well. But people hated it. But then when they did the revival, he's kissing people left, right, and center. He's always kissing people. Even the 13th Doctor was kissing people, and everyone's falling in love with the Doctor. Everybody's like pining for the Doctor, and he's like a romantic, sexy figure now. And I'm like, and people love it. And I'm like, where were you in '96? You weren't there. You should have been there. We could have got a 6-episode series of this. But no, you hated it at the time, and now you love it. And that's always annoyed me, that all these things that they said were too American and they weren't Doctor Who in '96. You jump ahead to 2004, and everyone's like, yeah, kiss Billy Piper. Yeah, we want to see you kissing Billy Piper and running about and threatening to shoot people with a laser pistol and all this sort of thing. And it's been 20 years since the revival of Doctor Who, and I'm still in '96 being like, where were you? Where were these people in '96? It's really interesting.
I don't know. I haven't really thought of it. I didn't think it was that unusual. Or unusual is not the right word. Like I thought it worked for the moment, but I do think that it works and it makes sense as for the Doctor, as someone with a long lifespan, that he wouldn't jump into a romantic relationship, that he would give any sort of relationship a long time to grow.
Yeah.
And before he would go straight on to kissing, because this is someone that's thousands of years old, so he's not going to just go straight to kissing somebody within hours of meeting them.
I do wonder if maybe, again, a slight tweaking of the scene, maybe it would have been better if she had kissed him, but then I feel like that would be more problematic because obviously she'd only just known him for a few hours and all this sort of thing. So it wouldn't you'd have to do some rewriting to work that in, or you could easily leave out both kisses and the line where she said she's met, the right guy sort of thing, or leave that in as just a joke, but now it's like, They've retroactively gone back and said the Doctor has been in love with a few of his companions in the past, and that's kind of why he's left them because he can't stand to lose them and all this sort of thing. And I do like that, but and I'm not against it. It just bugs me because I remember people being up in arms about it in '96, and I'm watching the movie thinking, I don't see a massive issue with this. Like, he was happy. He'd gotten 800 years of his memories back, and he in the heat of the moment he kissed an attractive woman. I'm like, what's wrong with that? It's not like they were sleeping together and all this sort of thing. They had, and then within a few hours they saved the world, and it was quite a cordial goodbye kiss. And I've always been like, I'd love to know what it would be like for them to meet again, which they may have done in an audiobook, but I'm not certain. And I'm pretty certain he's never. I don't know how much he pined for her after that, but it was nowhere near as much as the Doctor was like a puppy dog for Rose. He couldn't stop thinking about Rose. Rose is the love of his life.
That whole Martha.
Yeah.
The entire run with Martha is him being hung up on Rose, while Martha is pining for the Doctor, but he's not over Rose. It's
been really good for me in the last few years, at least, to see a lot of people now talking about how much they like Paul McGann, and they don't mind this movie. They'll forgive things about this movie. I think it has gotten a bit more credibility now. It's definitely probably a cult sort of favorite now. And there's a lot of regret that we didn't get to see more from him. It's very similar to the Colin Baker. Like, Colin Baker's always talked about how he hated his outfit, and whenever you see that is the Sixth Doctor, isn't it? I lose track sometimes. Whenever you see the Sixth Doctor now in the audiobooks and stuff, they put him in the outfit he wanted to wear, which is like a blue kind of ensemble, and he doesn't look like an idiot anymore and all this sort of thing. And you get that kind of. You bring him back a bit. And I love when Paul McGann, he showed up in the 13th Doctor's last story, I think. He showed up randomly when they were shifting through the different regenerations, and they're all in robes except for him. And then the other lives criticize him. He's like, I can wear whatever I want. It's our subconscious. And I was like, I love that he's still sticking out. He's still different from the others. And I was like, that's great, because he was really good. And I never got it. I was like, and I was 96. I don't know how old I was then. I was a kid, definitely. I was like 12 or 13 or something. But I was just like, why can't you just be happy that it's the Doctor's back? And I was like, maybe, because I can understand the restraint of not using like the Daleks or the Cybermen and things like that. I think it makes sense if you're trying to bring this back. You want to keep it slightly grounded, so you use the Master, and the story it accommodates it. You can kind of understand it without knowing all the lore. You get that they're different. One's good, one's bad, one's nearly dead, one's not. And it kind of makes sense. And it's not just throwing you straight in the deep end with like Daleks and stuff. But maybe they needed that iconography. Maybe because I think everyone knew the Daleks, even if Doctor Who wasn't on at that time. It's kind of cultural consciousness in Britain. So maybe that would have been enough to see it through. But then people would be like, oh, the Daleks are too American. They're flying and they're going upstairs and they can't do that. And now in the revival series, they're flying through space and all this sort of thing. And I'm like, where were these people in '96? They probably weren't born is the answer. They were probably born in '95, and so they grew up with the revival series. So that's the Doctor Who they know. And it is interesting because my dad still watches the new Doctor Who, and I don't think he likes it as much as the classic because it's not what he remembers it being. Whereas I was kind of right in that middle, that dead space where there was no Doctor Who. And then Paul McGann was like, I want to see more. And then when they finally show repeats, you go back to it, and then the new one comes along, and it's very jumping about, trying to fill all the blanks in and get up with it. So it's interesting that you're going through it and trying to sort of watch all of it, now. Every now and then I'll do that on BBC iPlayer. I'm like, I'll just watch some Tom Baker, Doctor Who. What's on? Just like, yeah, bit of classic Doctor Who.
Yeah, and I have gone back and watched, a couple more classic Who's other than the ones that I've covered. Like I went back and I did the 5 Doctors and the 3 Doctors.
Yes,
and those were fun as well.
You preferred the 3 Doctors to the 5, if I remember right.
Possibly. I don't. I don't. It's been like a month, and I've already kind of forgotten.
They both had those issues where the first wasn't really in the 3 Doctors, and the 4th wasn't really in the 5 Doctors. So it was more like it could have been. It wasn't all it could have been because you couldn't get all the Doctors in, And I do like now that they do it, like they'll do a multi-Doctor story now, but it's like they're more like cameos rather than a whole part of the story most of the time. But I think, you know, Paul McGann's still there. I think he should come back and do I wanted him to be in Day of the Doctor. That's what I didn't like about the War Doctor. I was like, no, this should have been Paul McGann. I wanted to see him in the War Doctor's role, because we would have saved a regeneration, and it just would have given him a chance to come back and do something. But I remember they said they didn't want to do that because they didn't want to tarnish his character and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but you've cost a life. You've messed up the numbering now. Like it's not the 15th Doctor, he's the 16th, and all this sort of thing. And I'm like, it always bothered me. And I was like, the only saving grace is that was a good episode, and John Hurt is really good in the role. But I'm like, yeah, but I feel like he could have been in it in a different role. Maybe they should have had him play like the Valyard, like a different version of the Doctor, like a possible version, and things like this. So I was like, did you have to do this? Could you not have just said to Paul McGann, we want you to come back and we want to see, because you couldn't get Eccleston, so let's use Paul McGann. Like, no. And I'm like, oh, come on, man. I just wanted to see Paul McGann come back, and because he could have carried it, because he was very emotional. So,
and I've also I just recently read that Peter Capaldi has said recently that he has no interest in coming back for future cameos, at least not unless, you know, he did kind of leave it open a little bit, where, you know, he says that he doesn't want to come back because he wouldn't have any control over the character. So he does kind of leave the opening where if he had some sort of control over the character, or if it was something, or if he was like given a script that he agreed with, that there's the chance that he would come back. But as of right now, he has no interest in returning to the role.
I did see an odd thing where he said once that he didn't want to come back because he'd said everything he wanted to say, and he had like a swan song. And I was like, yeah, but we're not asking you to come back and return to the role. We're asking you to come back and do a multi-Doctor episode. So you're coming back, but you're not like taking over. I was like, did you misunderstand the question? But that's a shame, because I liked him. I think a lot of his writing was terrible, but a lot of new Doctor Who's writing has been pretty bad from where I'm sitting. But I liked him because I liked David Tennant, and I liked Matt Smith, but I like an older, crotchety, kind of grouchy sort of Doctor and I was like, well, if you've got Peter Capaldi, at least with him, you're not going to have his companions falling in love with him and seeing him as this romantic sex symbol. He's going to be a crotchety old. He was very First Doctor, very Seventh Doctor. He had a bit of a dark edge to him, and I liked that. But man, some of his writing was awful for his series. But yeah, that is a shame, because I would love it if he popped up somewhere down the line, especially because he's getting on a bit, and you know. I'd hate to miss the opportunity there, but I do like seeing.
I thought it was fun. I thought it was fun seeing him, you know, early, because he was in the Pompeii episode as a different character.
Yeah, that was interesting, and the fact that they had to kind of explain it, and I'm like, I don't know if you really have to. Like, I feel like you could just ignore it, because it's like, you've seen the movie Armageddon with Bruce Willis.
No.
Well, obviously Bruce Willis is in this movie. There's a line by a character later where they reference the movie Pulp Fiction, and I've always had this thing where I'm like, in the context of this movie world, Pulp Fiction exists, which means Bruce Willis exists. So in my head, his character must have had his people must have said to him like, hey, you look a lot like Bruce Willis. You know, I'm like, can't you just do you have to acknowledge it? Because I remember they explained it, and I don't think I was massively happy with the explanation. I was just kind of like, this is weird. Like, what's your explanation is you're stealing the face of someone you saved because to remind you that people need to be saved or whatever. And I was like, I don't know, just ignore it. Like, just cast whoever you want. I don't really care. What bothered me, that's why it bothered me when they brought back David Tennant, because I thought they were going to give a really deep explanation for it. And I thought it was going to be, there was a line one time, I think it was in Day of the Doctor, or at some point, Matt Smith mentioned that the 10th Doctor was vain, and he loved himself, and all this sort of thing. And people often say that the 10th Doctor he became a personality separate from the other regenerations. And I was like, I think that it'd be great if when the 13th was regenerating in this limbo where all his past and future selves are, that the 10th Doctor had like forced himself back into the body to be like, I'm coming back. I'm going to take the opportunity to come back. And because I'm not finished yet, but that didn't happen. And they treated it as a whole new life. And I was like, you've just wasted this life. But then they didn't, because he split into two. And I was like, man, he's already got a double in an alternate universe. And now there's 3 of him. I'm like, what are you doing? It was, yeah, I wasn't too happy with that. I was like, can we not just bring Paul McGann back? Like, this is it.
Every time.
I do. Every time they're saying who's going to be the new Doctor, I'm online like, it should be Paul McGann. And knowing my luck, they'll cast the new Doctor and it'll be Eric Roberts. They'll say, no, we brought Eric Roberts in. I'm like, no, this is. They've swapped roles. Eric Roberts is going to be the Doctor and Paul McGann's going to be the Master. And I'm like, no. Oh, dear.
But I did have 2 more things that I wanted to talk about in the movie that I thought were worth mentioning before kind of wrapping this up. But I did think it was interesting that they had kind of a couple Jesus parable moments. Whenever he does revive in the morgue, Will Sasso refers to him as the second coming. Right. And then we kind of get another moment whenever the Master is trying to steal his body, and we get the crown of thorns.
Yeah, that's a good spot there. Yeah, that is good. It's not as explicit as it could be, which is kind of good. I think it's just a little thing there. That's a good one. I loved that scene where he's got him hooked up and he's trying to take over his body. There's a bit where I always really feel the Eighth Doctor's like desperation, because he literally cannot do anything, and he's just like begging for something to intervene, possibly even divine intervention. And when Grace is there like messing about trying to solve, and I was watching it last night, like, I mean, he gave the comparison to an alarm clock, which I've never understood, and I was like, how is that? I was like, I think the comparison should have been, do you know how to hotwire a car? Because that's what she was doing. I was like, what are you talking about with an alarm clock? Like, and then she's like plugging it in, and he's like, begging for it to stop and all this. And then, yeah, the TARDIS brings, Grace and Lee back to life, which is that's not a power I know it can do. Like, this is the interesting thing about it, because the implication seems to be they go back in time, and then that means it undoes their death and kind of brings them back. And historically, that's not really how time travel works in Doctor Who. Their time travel is very fast and loose. Whenever they want to give him a dire situation, they call it a fixed point. They pretend like it can't be changed. And I'm like, I've always hated that, but I thought that was kind of cute.
Yeah, I think that the 2 kind of which I've things, especially it's a lot, comes up a lot in New Who. The 2 kind of narrative devices, narrative crutches, I think it's more appropriate to say, is deadlocked and fixed point in time.
I've always thought that was really lazy writing. They're just like, we want to write this character off, or we want to write an unwinnable situation. We'll just pretend that magically now your time travel can't solve this problem. And I'm like, can you not just take another 2 hours to think of a way of making it so something else happens, like, act of God, natural disaster, some kind of other thing, rather than just it's deadlock. Sometimes they do it well. There was the one, I think it was Pyramids of Mars, I think, where he did that fantastic, where David Tennant did that fantastic like Time Lord triumphant thing, and he just sort of broke the rules of time and everything. And you get like where sometimes when they do like a time loop, and it's like, no matter what you do, this character keeps dying. I just wish they wouldn't use that phrasing, like, oh, it's a fixed point in time. I'm like, I think if you just said, oh, it doesn't matter what I do, I keep failing, that would make more sense to me, because a fixed point in time implies there is some kind of cosmic being or a god that's like, no, not this, but not this. And it's like, it's really contrived, and it gets old because it happens so often. I'm like, oh, everything's a fixed point in time. Like, oh, shut up. Like, no, it isn't. Just change time. You do it all the time. Like, you're doing it right now. Like,
Yeah, the other thing, the last thing that I want to mention that I thought was funny is the whole like soul transference. Reminded me a lot of Dark Crystal, if you've ever seen that.
no, unfortunately, I haven't. I've skipped that one. But, yeah, I don't know how. Yeah, I want to say that Master has tried to steal his lives before, but it's always been quite vague. Even in this movie, it's quite vague. It's like kind of transfer type thing. Yeah, it's an interesting one because especially considering the Time Lords can just gift you lives, and they even do that for the Master later down the line. They bring him back and they gift him new regenerations and everything, and so obviously they wouldn't do that at this point, but it is interesting that that's a thing apparently, that you can steal a Time Lord's lives, but only if you have a human to open the Eye of Harmony and all this sort of thing. And because I think the Eye of Harmony has showed up before in Doctor Who. I think there was an episode that was called it, but I don't know hugely much about it. All I really know about it is from this movie, and I'm like, well, it feels like a really dangerous thing to have in the TARDIS. It's a good job only a human can open it. It's not like there's ever a human in the TARDIS.
Yeah,
You might just go wandering and open it up and be like, oh, what's in here? But have you opened the Eye of Harmony again? Like, what are you doing? I can't close it. I'm only half human.
Well, I think that's, we've talked enough about this, and unless there was anything specific that you wanted to bring up before we kind of wrap things up.
Did you actually enjoy it in the end? Are you glad that you watched it?
Yeah, I am glad that I watched it. I thought, I'm not going to say that it was great. It was definitely very weird.
Yeah.
But I am glad that I watched it. I had a lot of fun watching it.
Did you find it weird watching this and then watching a regular episode of Doctor Who? Because did it feel like when you watched a regular episode of Doctor Who that was too British? Is it too British? It's like,
I mean, I do feel like that New Who does, it's still, I can still tell that I'm watching like a British show, but it does feel like kind of that bridge between, it's like a British show with American sensibilities.
Yeah, I think that's probably what it is people knew it was. This is where now you were saying earlier about people talking about the Disney Who. And I'm like, Disney have just sort of paid to broadcast it. I don't think they're really that involved in the production or the script writing as far as I know. But I haven't looked into it that deeply. And I think it is that of like, well, no, it's in Britain and we're just giving it this cinematic flair, so that means it's okay. But for where I'm sitting, it's all the same thing. Like, if you didn't like it back then, you shouldn't like it now, but they do. And say all the things that people didn't like before, they now rave about. And I think I just hope it puts more people onto this film so they can see it and they can enjoy it and think about, oh yeah, it's a shame we didn't see more of it, because it's a special one for me. I've got a lot of time for it because of when I watched it, even though it is flawed. But I'll go out on a limb and say almost every era and episode of Doctor Who has some kind of flaw in it. Even the really good episodes, you could always find some kind of flaw. But it doesn't mean it's not enjoyable. And I think it gets a bad reputation sometimes for no real reason. Or maybe it's just because I grew up watching a lot of American movies and stuff, so I don't really mind if it's too American. It's like, be more American. Maybe not.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me and talking about the Eighth Doctor. And for people that haven't heard you before, why don't you take a moment and let them know about your other work and where you can be found online.
Sure. So yeah, I'm Dr. Stuart Knott. I have a website called drkwaitingroom.com where I review movies and comics and TV shows. I review Doctor Who every November for Doctor Who Day, and I've reviewed this movie on there before. Not really on social media anymore, but I'm about. I've also on Amazon and written a few horror books and stuff, so check them out.
All right, sounds good, and I'll have that link in the show notes as well. Yeah. And of course, I'm Bubbawheat, and you can find me on social media everywhere where I'm at Bubbawheat. Although these days I'm most active on Threads, a little bit on Blue Sky, but not too much yet. But I still have them all on my phone. So if you find me and message me, then I will most likely reply. I also have a Facebook group. It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group, and you can join that to discuss episodes as they come out. You could also have discussions about time loop movies and TV episodes, past, present, and future. All of that is welcome there. And until next time, smoke me a kipper, and I'll regenerate for breakfast next week.
Thanks for having me.